On December 16, 1944, in the early morning in Mona, Germany, the frozen ground shook again as American artillery shells whizzed overhead. However, this morning felt strikingly different. The shells were not hitting the ground or trees. Instead, they exploded in the air right above the advancing German formations. This created a deadly shower of steel fragments that offered no protection, even to those in foxholes. Within the 326th Volt Grenadier Division, those soldiers who had endured years on the Eastern Front faced something they could hardly comprehend. This was not the artillery they knew. There were no predictable impacts, no safe zones, and no comfort in their entrenched positions. This was death raining down from the sky with alarming accuracy. At that moment, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group made a pivotal decision without official authorization during the Battle of the Bulge. He ordered his gunners to load shells equipped with proximity fuses, a closely guarded secret of the Allied forces. These fuses had tiny radar systems that detected their distance from targets, detonating at the perfect height to enhance artillery effectiveness by 50 times. The lethal math of warfare was changing in the icy forests of the Ardennes. What the German soldiers did not realize was that they faced a revolutionary weapon that would not only impact this battle, but changed the nature of warfare forever. The storm had been unleashed. Operation Watch on the Rhine began with high hopes for the German forces. Hitler's last gamble included 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, all hidden in the foggy Ardennes. The Führer had assured his generals that this offensive would split the Allied armies and reclaim Antwerp, potentially turning the tide of a war that seemed increasingly lost. The initial bombardment at 5:30 in the morning on December 16th caught the Allies completely off guard. German artillery unleashed a staggering rate of 1,600 rounds per minute along the 85-mile front. American intelligence had suffered a catastrophic failure, missing the massive military build-up. Many frontline units consisted of inexperienced replacements or worn-out veterans sent to this quiet sector for a brief rest. At Monschau, Colonel Axelson confronted a dire tactical situation. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit, was being crushed by stronger German forces. Conventional artillery could not halt the attack. In a moment of desperation, Axelson made a bold decision. He chose to deploy the secret proximity-fused shells without permission. He knew he could face a court-martial for this choice, but he understood that following orders would lead to certain defeat. The results were immediate and catastrophic. German soldiers advancing in typical formations suddenly faced a type of fire they had never encountered. The shells detonated 30 to 50 feet above them. Each explosion created a shower of fragments that spread over a much larger area than conventional ground-burst shells. Seasoned veterans, who knew how to take cover from normal artillery, were destroyed in their foxholes behind trees and in ditches. They sought shelter, but it was futile. The proximity fuse was a blend of American scientific innovation and industrial capability at its finest. Unlike standard shells that needed direct impact or time fuses, which often malfunctioned, the proximity fuse featured a radar system no bigger than a coffee can. Inside each fuse, American engineers packed 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniature vacuum tubes that could endure the severe forces of being fired from artillery. The physics were incredible. When fired, the immense acceleration would crush a glass ampule containing electrolyte, generating a battery that powered the tiny radar for the shell's flight. Dr. Murtavadion's Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory led this effort with the same intensity as the Manhattan Project. The lab, cleverly disguised as an abandoned used car lot in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed 3% of all American physicists at its peak. Security was as tight as that of the atomic bomb program. Workers could not discuss their projects, even with family, and each fuse had a unique serial number for tracking purposes. Overcoming the technical challenges seemed nearly impossible. Vacuum tubes made for home radios needed complete redesigns to endure cannon fire. They had to function while spinning at extreme speeds. The technology allowed fuses to detect targets without going off too soon. The innovation came from miniaturization techniques that would later change the electronics industry. Dr. James Van Allen developed tubes that were about the size of pencil erasers, yet contained all the functions of traditional radio tubes. By December 1944, American factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses each day. Over 100 companies participated in this effort, including RCA, General Electric, Sylvania, and Crossley Corporation. The program's costs reached $1 billion in 1940s money, second only to the Manhattan Project in wartime expenses. On December 16th, Axelson acted without authorization, leading to a crisis in command. He had ignored direct orders that restricted the use of proximity fuses to anti-aircraft applications. There was a concern that the Germans might reverse engineer the fuses if captured. However, the extraordinary effectiveness demonstrated at Mona could not be overlooked. The German assault was halted, resulting in casualties that shocked both sides. News of the weapon's impact quickly reached Supreme Headquarters. General Eisenhower saw the dire situation unfolding in the Ardennes and formally requested permission to use the fuses in ground combat on December 19th. By December 21st, all restrictions were lifted, and the fuses were authorized for general use throughout the Bulge battlefield. The swift distribution showcased American logistical superiority. Within days, artillery units across the Ardennes received proximity-fused shells. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion in Bastonia got their supply just as the Germans closed in on the town. The 420th Armoured Field Artillery Battalion, using M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began employing the fuses to defend the northwest approaches. The 969th Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit led by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, used them effectively southwest of Bastonia. Each unit realized the same fact. Proximity fuses changed artillery from a support tool into a powerful weapon on the battlefield. Forward observers no longer needed to make detailed fire adjustments. The fuses automatically found the best detonation point. This reduced accuracy requirements while increasing lethality significantly. The siege of Bastonia clearly illustrated the capabilities of proximity fuses. In defensive warfare, the 101st Airborne Division was completely surrounded and outnumbered. Nevertheless, they held the vital crossroads against relentless German assaults. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion provided vital artillery support. This unit was equipped with 75mm pack howitzers that could fire proximity-fused shells. From December 19th to December 31st, they fired a total of 7,676 rounds, as noted in their official records. Though not all rounds were proximity-fused due to supply limitations, the ones that had devastating effects, German formations disintegrated under the airburst shells, with entire platoons wiped out in mere seconds. During the attack on December 22nd, following General McAuliffe's famous nuts response to the German surrender demand, the weapon's effectiveness was on full display. German infantry advanced across snow-covered fields in traditional formations, appearing vulnerable. The proximity-fused shells exploded overhead at precise moments, creating overlapping destruction. There was no place for them to take cover. The all-African-American 969th Artillery Battalion also played a critical role. Their 155mm howitzers created a deadly perimeter around Bastogne that German forces could not breach. The larger shells detonated at 50 feet, spreading lethal fragments over a wide area. German prisoners later reported that advancing units often lost their cohesion before even reaching American lines. Many soldiers fled from the terrifying airbursts. The Sauer River slaughter stands out as one of the most documented examples of proximity fuse effectiveness. This occurred near the Sauer River close to Ectan on December 25th and 26th. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was moving north to relieve Bastogne, witnessed this battle firsthand and chronicled it in his memoir, War as I Knew It. A German battalion attempted to cross the partly frozen river, thinking darkness and fog concealed them from American observers. Traditional artillery fire would have needed careful adjustments, allowing the Germans time to cross or find cover. However, proximity-fused shells did not require such adjustments. Patton noted, "We caught a German battalion crossing the Sauer. The new ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river was behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing ceased, we counted 702 bodies. This figure, 702 killed by actual count. This represents one of the few well-documented casualty figures resulting from the use of proximity fuses. The mathematical efficiency was clear. A single battalion could vanish in mere minutes, leaving no chance for escape or defense. The psychological impact radiated throughout German units in the area. Soldiers began refusing orders for river crossings. Forest warfare underwent a drastic transformation. The dense forests of the Ardennes, which the Germans had relied on for cover, became deadly traps with the introduction of proximity fuses. On open terrain, a proximity fuse that detonated at 30 to 50 feet was lethal enough. But in the forests, the effects were exponentially worse. Airbursts shattered tree branches, creating thousands of additional wooden projectiles. These splinters, some as long as a man's arm, travelled at very high speeds, causing lethal injuries. Traditional defensive tactics were rendered ineffective. Seeking cover behind large trees or digging foxholes became futile. Fragments and splinters rained down from above, undermining centuries of tactical wisdom in forest combat. American artillery units quickly understood this compounding effect. A single proximity-fused 155mm shell, exploding above the tree line, could wipe out all living things in an area the size of a tennis court. The combination of metallic fragments from the shell and wooden splinters from the trees created a kill zone with no escape, no matter how skilled the soldiers were. German units that had trained for forest warfare found their expertise useless. Spreading out to prevent mass casualties left them vulnerable to widespread effects. Conversely, clustering together for support meant that entire squads could be wiped out by just one shell. There was no effective tactical solution to this new threat. This was a demonstration of technical superiority in action. The proximity fuse operated on principles that would have seemed like science fiction to soldiers in the 1940s. Each fuse contained a tiny radio transmitter that operated between 180 and 220 MHz. It continuously sent out waves that reflected off various surfaces, including the ground, trees, vehicles, and human bodies. As the shell neared its target, the reflected signal grew stronger. When it reached the preset intensity for the optimal burst height, an electronic switch triggered the detonation. The entire system had to perform flawlessly under conditions that would typically destroy regular electronics. During firing, the acceleration could reach 20,000 times the force of gravity, enough to crush a human body to nearly nothing. The shells spun rapidly, generating enormous centrifugal forces. Temperatures varied widely, reaching 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit in gun barrels to sub-zero conditions at the peak of their trajectory. Despite these extremes, the fragile vacuum tubes, protected by advanced cushioning systems, worked with over 80% reliability. Extensive testing at the Aberdeen Proving Ground determined the best burst heights for the 105mm howitzers. The standard artillery piece, measuring 30 feet, proved effective. The 155mm guns reached maximum lethality at 50 feet. The rare 240mm shells caused devastating damage at over 70 feet, capable of clearing entire grid squares of enemy positions. This technological advantage translated to battlefield superiority. Studies indicated that proximity fuses increased lethality by 5 to 10 times compared to standard shells. The lethal fragmentation area increased by a factor of 50. In anti-aircraft applications, the improvements were even more remarkable. The success rate for shooting down V-1 flying bombs rose from 17% to 79% within weeks of deploying proximity fuses. German intelligence admitted significant failures regarding these fuses. In December 1944, German forces captured an American ammunition depot, seizing about 20,000 proximity-fused shells. This intelligence breakthrough should have prompted an immediate development of countermeasures. Instead, German technical experts investigated the captured fuses and deemed them impossible. They believed that the presence of vacuum tubes in artillery shells contradicted their understanding of electronics and ballistics. They thought the Americans were using some form of magnetic detection, or that the visible components were simple decoys. This misunderstanding was partly due to institutional blindness. Germany had pioneered proximity fuse development before the war. Companies like Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG Berlin had working prototypes by 1940. However, Hitler's directive to cancel all weapons projects that required more than 6 months to produce ended this initiative. German engineers could not fathom that the Americans had solved issues they had abandoned. The irony increased when considering German technological capabilities. Their electrostatic proximity fuses had achieved 95% reliability in tests based on changes in electrical capacitance rather than radar. If development had continued, Germany might have deployed proximity fuses by 1941. Hermann Göring later admitted that German fuses were only 3 to 4 months away from production when the war ended. The Christmas catastrophe struck on December 25, 1944. There was no holiday respite. German units, hoping to use Christmas for resupply and reorganization, found that proximity fuses recognized no ceasefires. Field kitchens, supply convoys, and assembly areas faced devastating bombardment, needing no forward observers. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone fired more than 1,000 rounds on Christmas Day, mostly proximity fused. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers delivered rapid and accurate fire, catching German units completely off guard. The ability to fire effectively without observation in poor weather and darkness turned artillery into a 24-hour threat. This had a severe psychological impact. German soldiers had learned to maneuver in bad weather when Allied aircraft couldn't fly and observers couldn't see them. Proximity fuses removed this sanctuary. Death could strike at any moment in any weather, with only the brief whistle of incoming shells as a warning. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Skorzeny's elite commandos tried to capture Malmedy. These were not ordinary soldiers but specially selected troops. They had rescued Mussolini, nearly captured Tito, and infiltrated American lines while wearing United States uniforms. They were the best Germany could offer. However, they were met with devastating proximity-fused artillery fire. This transformed their American disguises from an advantage into death shrouds. The shells exploded overhead with strange precision, as if they could detect the impostors below. The exact casualty figures are disputed, but the attack ended catastrophically, suffering heavy losses that halted Skorzeny's offensive operations. The psychological breakdown among elite SS troops was particularly notable. These soldiers, indoctrinated to believe in German superiority and trained to the highest standards, found themselves helpless against American technology. Some survivors reportedly charged directly at American lines, preferring quick death over continued bombardment. This was a complete breakdown of military discipline among Hitler's most fanatical troops. The production miracle behind proximity fuses was equivalent to any wartime industrial achievement. By December 1944, over 100 fuses were manufactured. American companies shifted to producing fuses. The Crossley Corporation stopped making refrigerators to focus on fuse assembly. Emerson Radio transformed from home electronics to weapons production. Sylvania, RCAA, and General Electric dedicated entire facilities to the effort. Quality control was unprecedented in mass production. Each of the 130 components underwent individual testing. Every solder joint was meticulously inspected. Random samples were actually fired to ensure they could survive combat. The rejection rate was unforgiving. Any component with even slight deviations was discarded. The workforce, mainly women, achieved this precision while working 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. They did not know exactly what they were making due to security compartmentalization. They only understood it was essential to the war effort. By December 1944, they produced a proximity fuse every 2 seconds around the clock. The cost reduction was impressive. In 1942, each fuse cost $732, more than a worker's annual salary. By December 1944, mass production reduced the cost to $18 per unit while maintaining high quality. This efficiency led to the production of 22 million fuses during the war, with 200,000 used in the Battle of the Bulge alone. General Patton recognized the value of proximity fuses better than most commanders. His Third Army, advancing to relieve Bastogne, utilized them as a breakthrough weapon. His artillery commander, Brigadier General Edward Williams, developed new tactics to employ the proximity fuses effectively. Williams pioneered the time-on-target concentration that involved multiple battalions firing together so the shells would arrive simultaneously. When numerous proximity-fused shells detonated at the right height, the impact was devastating. German soldiers referred to it as the bell toll of death. During the week from December 22nd to December 29th, Patton's Third Army fired 50,000 proximity-fused shells. The results were crucial in breaking German resistance and opening the path to Bastogne. Patton noted, "The funny fuse won the Battle of the Bulge for us." Elsenborn Ridge showcased the maximum effectiveness of proximity fuses. Here, the 2nd and 99th Infantry Divisions defended critical terrain against the 6th SS Panzer Army, which included the elite 1st SS Panzer Division. Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler. In just 3 days from December 17 to 19, American artillery launched 160,000 rounds. About 40,000 of those were equipped with proximity fuses. This 25% of shells resulted in an estimated 60% of the over 5,000 German casualties. The numbers clearly showed that proximity fuses increased American firepower fourfold. German attacks surged up the steep, forested slopes but met fierce bursts of airburst steel. Entire companies vanished in mere seconds. Bodies piled up so high that the following waves had to climb over their fallen comrades. After 3 days, the attacks stopped. The elite Waffen-SS had been defeated by American technology. On January 1, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte. 900 fighters targeted Allied airfields. The attack was a complete surprise, catching many Allied aircraft on the ground. However, returning German pilots faced walls of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. Of the 277 German aircraft lost that day, 172 fell to anti-aircraft guns, the majority using proximity fuses. The kill rate shocked both sides. German pilots, trained to evade traditional anti-aircraft fire, found themselves targeted by shells that detonated at just the right moment. The Luftwaffe, already weakened, could not recover from these losses. By early January 1945, keeping this information secret became impossible. Too many shells had been fired, and too many soldiers had seen their effects. On January 6, the War Department allowed limited disclosure. The New York Times reported on a new type of artillery shell that enhanced American firepower, though the details of the technology were not revealed. German intelligence finally recognized the weapon's significance, but it was too late. A January 10th report from Foreign Armies West stated, "The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse that detonates shells at the optimal height for anti-personnel effect. This weapon has inflicted severe casualties on our forces in the Ardennes. No effective countermeasures exist." Post-war analysis revealed the decisive impact of proximity fuses. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt noted, "The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks failed not due to American bravery, though they fought well, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." General Hasso von Manteuffel, the commander of the 5th Panzer Army, stated, "The American artillery was the terror of our soldiers, particularly the new shells that exploded in the air. They sparked fear even among experienced soldiers." The numbers reveal the truth. 200,000 proximity-fused shells were fired. This resulted in an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 German casualties, which is up to 20% of their total losses. The weapon proved 5 to 10 times more effective than traditional ammunition and required no forward observation in poor weather. Behind every statistic lies a human tragedy. German soldiers, many being teens drafted in the war's final stages, died in ways that traditional warfare had never imagined. They faced weapons that seemed capable of finding them wherever they tried to hide. American factory workers also paid a heavy price. Factory accidents were often kept quiet for security reasons. Workers at Crosley Corporation, Emerson Radio, and other facilities experienced breakdowns due to stress and fatigue. They produced weapons of unprecedented lethality without truly understanding what they were creating, all while suffering in silence. Yet the moral complexities of war are never straightforward. The Battle of the Bulge claimed 19,000 American lives. If proximity fuses had not existed, how many more would have perished? How much longer would the conflict have dragged on? How many more victims of the Holocaust would have died amid all the fighting? Each day the war was shortened, potentially saved thousands in concentration camps waiting for liberation. The proximity fuse program led to advancements that changed post-war technology. Miniaturized vacuum tubes became the backbone of modern electronics. Quality control measures set for fuse production established standards across the industry. The organizational strategies that managed hundreds of suppliers laid the groundwork for modern supply chain management. Dr. James Van Allen applied his expertise in miniaturization to satellite technology, leading to the discovery of Earth's radiation belts. Radar principles evolved into today's modern systems. The idea of autonomous sensors making decisions became the basis for guided missiles and eventually all smart weapons. Every precision-guided munition today traces its roots back to the proximity fuse. It was the first weapon capable of sensing its surroundings and deciding when to detonate. The revolution that began in the Ardennes continues in today's battlefields, where smart weapons now dominate warfare. The Battle of the Bulge came to an end on January 25, 1945, with German forces retreating. Hitler's last offensive cost Germany around 100,000 soldiers. Casualties were significant, with American losses reaching 75,000, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse had proven itself to be more than just a weapon. It was a game changer. General Eisenhower noted that if the Germans had possessed proximity fuses, D-Day could have been extremely tough, maybe even impossible. This highlights their strategic value. They were not just an improvement in artillery, they represented a groundbreaking technology that changed the dynamics of warfare. German soldiers faced artillery that felt intelligent, capable of finding them anywhere. This transformed the air into a killing zone. Their encounters marked a shift in warfare towards a technological era. From Colonel Axelson's first unauthorized use on December 16, 1944, to the deployment of 200,000 shells across the Ardennes. Proximity fuses showed that scientific advances could yield a decisive military edge. The combination of American industrial strength, scientific innovation, and tactical changes produced a weapon that influenced the war's outcome. The story of the proximity fuse is essentially one of transformation, technological, tactical, and human. It demonstrated that industrial democracy could create exceptionally effective weapons. Innovation could compensate for numerical disadvantages, and the side with better science was likely to win. These lessons not only influenced the remaining part of World War II, but also reshaped the entire nature of warfare moving forward. In the icy woods of the Ardennes, the age of technological warfare began. The small radar sets inside artillery shells rewrote the mathematics of death, altering how conflicts are fought. The German soldiers who fell victim to proximity-fused airbursts were not just casualties of a specific battle. They were also part of a revolution in military strategy that continues to impact our world today.